Hey everyone, Pete Calandra here. Today's video is a review of Class 6 of my Audio MIDI 2 class Spring 2021 semester at the Aaron Copland School of Music, Queens College, City University of New York. The first half of the class, I'm introducing the students to the basics of compression and show how to use it on several different drum loops. Then, for the second half of the class, we pick up with where we left off last week with stem mixing, and I pretty much get through mixing the entire piece. And there's a lot of really good information in there, and I hope you find it enjoyable and useful. If you like this video, give a thumbs up. For more content, please subscribe, and to be notified, ring that bell. Leave any comments or questions below. Thanks so much for watching, and let's get right into it. But the first thing that I want to start off with today is talking about compression. And this zip file that says compression contains Dynamics 3, this just the guide to these compressors inside of Pro Tools that we're going to use. We're only going to use 2 for our semester, and then compressor ratio explained. And I'm going to go through this stuff because this is really important to understanding how compressors work. So inside of Pro Tools, depending upon what package you've downloaded or installed in your computer or have installed in your computer, you'll have a bunch of plugins from Air Music Technology. We're not going to use these for this. It does come with a compressor, but I think it does. Do I see a compressor? No, I don't. Well, anyway, but if I go down to Avid, see there's a lot of plugins with Avid, but I'm not sure what you guys were able to download. So the 2 that I'm fairly certain are the BF76, which looks like this, and the Dyne 3 compressor. So this is the one that we're going to start with. And there's the guide, right? So these are the only 2 compressors we're going to use this semester. There are other ones, but these are 2 good ones to learn with, because one is just your standard compressor with all the regular controls, so you can get used to using that. And the other one is a modeled compressor, like a compressor that's modeled after a piece of hardware was found in many studios, and they're still being manufactured, I believe. So now let's just talk about compression in general, right? So a compressor is, like EQ, a volume control, right? But where I said that compression is a frequency dependent volume control, compressor is a level dependent volume control. It takes the loudest part of the signal, and that's what gets brought down in volume. So for example, if you have a drum kit and the snare drum is really loud, the compressor will be triggered by the snare drum and bring the volume of everything down. And there are ways to mitigate that a little bit. And there are other kinds of compressors called multi-band compressors, which you can make them frequency dependent. But we're just going to learn the basics of compression. So a compressor is like an automated volume control. It's like somebody has their hand on a volume knob or a fader and brings it up and down for you automatically. That's one thing. A compressor is also a tone shaping tool, and we'll be demonstrating that as well. So if we look here on our compressor, right, we've got a bunch of controls. Over here, we're not going to worry about the key input. I'll show you how to use this in a future class when we do sidechain compression. But for right now, let's leave that alone. So at the top here, we've got a phase reversal switch, and I will go over that in a future class. Probably next week we're going to talk about phase. But it's got a level control, right? And you notice it's got left and right. So it's got an in and an out, right? And then over here, it's got a third level, which is GR. That's the amount of gain reduction. So you've got the input level, you've got the output level, and you've got the amount of gain reduction. Okay? We're going to ignore this over here for right now. This is the side chain. This works with the key input. I'll teach you that, but not today. All right? We've got this little graph here, which gives you a visual representation of some of these controls. Let's leave the knee alone for a minute. All right? The attack is how long it takes for the sound to start being compressed after it goes through the compressor. Okay? The release is how the compression is reduced once the sound goes below the threshold. The ratio is the amount of compression, and the threshold is the level at which the compression is engaged. So attack is the amount of time it takes before the compression kicks in, right? The release is how long it takes for the compression to stop once the sound goes below the threshold. The ratio is the amount that the sound gets reduced, and the threshold is the level that you set at which any sound above that threshold gets compressed. And the last thing to talk about is the gain. This is makeup gain. So you have a level, right? And you want to even out the sound so it fits in better in your mix. You're making it a little bit smoother. This is one of the things you do with compression. So if you're taking this automatic volume control and you're reducing the volume of the loudest parts of the sound, that means the overall volume is softer. So what you would use is the makeup gain to gain match so that the overall sound between the compressed sound and the uncompressed sound stays the same, but the dynamics are compressed or reined in a little bit more. Now, I showed you a little bit about gain matching with EQ, and it's the same principle here, and we'll definitely go over that. So let's talk about the ratio, okay? And ratio is not some sort of Twitter thing. I've got a really nice PDF here, which will explain it all. Okay, what does a compressor's ratio knob do? And notice the one reason I picked this is they're using our compressor that we have in Pro Tools. This is the ratio knob right here. The compressor's ratio knob controls how aggressively the compressor clamps down on a sound. Higher ratios, like 5:1, 6:1, 7:1, 10:1, will cause the compressor to react aggressively. This will tightly control dynamics and dramatically reduce the difference in volume between the loudest and softest parts of the performance. Right? So if you've got a soft instrument, it will sound like, let's say you have a drum kit and the hi-hats are really soft and the kick and the snare drum are really loud. With a higher ratio, what will sound to your ears is like you've brought the volume up on the hi-hats. They'll become more apparent in the mix. Higher ratios tend to sound less transparent and more processed. Lower ratios are gentler. They cause the compressor to just softly control a track's dynamics. This effect will preserve more of the track's natural peaks and valleys and lead to results that sound subtle and transparent. And oftentimes with lower ratios, and this is very true, you can't hear the compressor working at all. A compressor is nothing more than an automatic volume control. Whenever a sound gets louder than the compressor's threshold, the compressor reacts by turning it down. So the ratio answers the question: for every decibel the sound goes above the threshold, how many decibels, that's what dB stands for, should the compressor let through? So if you set up the compressor with a 2-to-1 ratio, for every 2 decibels the sound goes above the threshold, the compressor will only let 1 decibel through. For every 2 decibels that the sound goes above the threshold amount that you've set, the compressor will only let 1 decibel through. So if the threshold is set at -10 decibels and the sound of the audio track jumps up to -8 decibels, right? So -8 is a higher number than -10. I know this is a little bit of math right here, but we'll get off of the math shortly. So that -8 is 2 decibels above -10 decibels. The compressor will only let 1 decibel through and the sound will end up sounding at -9 decibels. So you've gone 2 above the threshold and it's only allowing 1 above the threshold to come through. So 1 greater than -10 is -9. Let me explain that again because that's confusing, AF. If the threshold is set to -10 dB and the sound jumps up to -8 dB, that -8 dB is 2 decibels above the threshold. And you've got your ratio set 2-to-1. The compressor, you've gone 2 above, it will only allow 1 decibel above the threshold to come through. So your sound will end up being -9 decibels. So let's say that the sound goes to -6 dB. That's 4 decibels above the threshold. 2-to-1, you do the math, then only 2 decibels will be let through because 4-to-2 is the same as 2-to-1. All right, that's math. I understand that. But what you'll get at is -8 dB. You just need to know for right now the general concepts. Okay, the more you do it, the more it will become apparent to you. But that's really important there about the ratio, right? That if you've set the ratio to 10-to-1 and your signal, you've got your threshold set at -10 and you've set the ratio to 10-to-1 and you go to 0 dB, so to unity gain, right? It won't let the volume go above the threshold. So that's called limiting, and that's a little bit different subject. So let's just remember that, okay? So that's really important. All the controls on the compressor work together. So it's best to adjust them all at once instead of just focusing on the ratio knob. And they suggest to don't solo the track you're compressing. Well, I'm demonstrating compression, so I only have drum tracks here. So let's play around with this. All right. And again, if you want to know what all the controls do on Dynamics 3, it's all written right in here. Okay. Let me zoom in on this a little bit. If you right click on this, you can bypass this. So I'm just bypassing this. I've got 3 different kinds of drum grooves here. Abada, abada, abada. I have 3 different kinds of drum grooves here. Okay, let's play the first one. Is that distorting at all? No? Okay, great. Here's another one. And here's a third one. So 3 different kinds of drum grooves. The sound of the drums is similar in track 1 and track 2, but let's see if you can tell the difference between the sounds. Focus in on the different instruments. Listen to the pitch of the kick drum or the snare drum on this first one. And now listen to the second one. First one. Second. Anybody venture a guess on the difference in the snare drums? Claudia, not a private message. Put that for the whole class, please. My friend. Listen one more time. That's the pitch of the snare drum. Right. Dum, dum, hum, hum, hum. Right. The second one is higher pitched than the first one. Let me pop up a piano and see if I can find these pitches. So that's a G. Right? It's between a G and a G sharp, so it's just it's a little bit sharper. See how that clashes a little bit, that G with that one? It's a little bit sharper, the pitch. And this one's sort of between a G and an F sharp. So it's just a little bit higher pitch, the second one. Okay, so let's turn on our compressor. So I'm going to right click and make unbypass it. And I'm just going to play. And I'm going to set the threshold very high so that there's no compression. And let me zoom in for you. Okay, so the first thing to notice is that this is the input level and this is the output level. And you notice that they're exactly the same. Now, do you see that this little triangle here? This is amber. The stuff is color coded. So if I turn this, you'll see the threshold. You'll see that it moves. This little triangle moves. You can also click the triangle and drag it up and down, and you'll see that the threshold changes here. And you'll notice that this amber line here, see, it's all color coordinated, moves to the left. Right? So let me just take a look at this. Now you can see the loudest sound is right here, right? So if I bring this down here, you see now how the sound is going above the threshold? Right? It's not doing anything yet. Because I have a very low ratio now. You could see it's exactly the same now because I've got the ratio of 1:1, right? Now, what happens if I bring the ratio up, let's say to like about 8? Still not doing anything. So let's bring the threshold down a little bit. Now you're starting to see a little action here on this guy here, right? This is the amount of reduction of gain. Okay, so let's bring the threshold down even more. And notice that I've got the ratio. You see how it is almost a flat line here? If I make the ratio less, you could see that that changes, right? So this is so now it's sort of like flatlining. This will be a very dramatic change in timbre. And you could see that I'm really right? You can hear that the sound is completely different if I bypass this. So listen to the volume of the hi-hat when it's bypassed, and then listen to the volume of the hi-hat when the compressor is in. It seems like the hi-hat is louder, but it's not. It's that the snare drum is softer and the kick drum is softer. So what's happening here is that the compressor is grabbing the transients of the loudest. Oh, Caitlin, you'll hear it. You just got to practice. And it's also over Zoom, right? So you got to keep that in mind. It's taking the transient, the loudest sound, and it's reducing the volume of that loudest sound by this insane ratio here. It's not really touching the hi-hats at all. Now, if I wanted to really work this out, you see how this is my output. It's so much less. So what I would do is I would turn the gain up. Now, those are both the same volume. You can see on the meters they're the same volume. But the second one sounds louder, right? Because the softer instruments have almost 5 dB of gain added to them, and the louder instruments have been brought down in volume. So the whole drum kit has more of a monodimensional dynamic to it. Okay? This is useful. This is too much, right? Compression. It's over the top. So let's bring our ratio down to like 3:1. And now we see our output level is too much, so we'll bring the makeup gain down a little bit. And we'll bring our threshold up. Now, right, this doesn't sound compressed compared to what we had before, right? But watch, I'll play it, and then I will bypass the compressor, and you'll be able to hear the difference in the sound, right? The hi-hats will get a little bit softer, and the snare drum and kick drum will sound a little bit louder. Right? So the hi-hats, they're a little bit more present now. A little softer now. Okay, so let's go back to our extreme setting. Any questions on this so far? This is not something that you're going to master after today's class. All right? This is going to be something where I'm going to have to explain this over and over again so you get it. And you might not even get it by the end of the class, but you have to be introduced to it. You know, I worked with compression for years before I understood how to use it, and there are times that I wish I had more of an understanding of it. You know, it's a very deep subject, and one thing you have to realize is that a compressor can be your friend, but it can also ruin your mix. It can suck the energy out of it. Give me one sec. Okay, so let's go back to our extreme ratio. And we'll turn our threshold up a little bit or down a little bit so that we should get a really compressed sound. So now we've got our attack set at 13.3 milliseconds, right? So let's make it a little bit, a quarter of a second almost, 250 milliseconds. It doesn't sound like it's compressed. So what I'm doing is when I click up here, it's bypassed, right? Very little compression, only on the very, very, very loud stuff, right? But if we look here, we're going way past, this is where our threshold is. Can anybody venture to guess why we're not hearing any compression? Well, think about a drum sound. What is it mostly?
They're all too quick.
Yes, correct. A drum sound is mostly attack. Now, that being said, the room that a drum is in, attack with a quick decay. That being said, the room that a drum is in has a huge effect on the timbre of the drum, right? Let me show you what I mean by that. Okay, I'm showing you Kontakt now. You guys don't have Kontakt in your computers, but I'm using it as if we were at college, you know, in live, there's Kontakt is in the lab. So let me do this. Okay, let's see. Here we go. Right, okay, so this is an orchestral snare that I'm popping in here. All right, so this sound, this is a Spitfire Audio orchestral library. This sound was recorded at Air Lyndhurst Studios in London, right? Right, and this is the sound of the close mic on the snare. This is the sound of the tree mics. Now, I might have mentioned this to you guys before, but let's say that you've got an orchestral setup, and you know your percussion is in sort of in the back-ish, and you have your conductor. Above the conductor's head is an array of 3 microphones set up with special spacing, and it's called a decatree. And so you might be 15 or 20 feet away from the drums. So what the decatree is doing is it's picking up the sound of the drum reflecting off all the walls because it's not close mic'd, right? And you're hearing, which sounds much different than the close mic here. Like that close mic sounds wimpy, but when it's in the room, it's got some gravitas to it. And then the ambient mics would be, there's 2 ways of doing ambient mics. They could be at the same level as the conductor, but spread further apart, or you could have them, Air Studios has a gallery that's up elevated on the 2nd floor, because it used to be a church, and I guess the choir would have been up there, and so the mics would be even further away and up towards the ceiling. This sounds like it's just at the same level as the conductor, just further apart. So even though a drum is mostly attack and a fairly quick decay, the sound of the room adds a lot more decay and a lot more gravitas to the sound of a drum. So just keep that in mind. This drum is recorded in a room, a small room, right? It's not completely dry, so it adds a lot. So my point being here, the attack is too high. So I'm going to play that. Let me just loop that so that it plays over and over again. So loop playback, I haven't showed you guys this. There's 2 ways to access it. You can right click here on this. There's 3 ways to access it. Right click here on the play button and click loop, and then you'll notice that has a little, let's see if I can zoom in on that. That has a little loop on it. You can go up to options, loop playback, and it's Command-Shift-L. And Command-Shift-L deactivates it also. So I've got it active now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the attack and bring the attack down until you start hearing when the compression comes in. Right? You can for sure hear compression now. And then that's basically crushing any attack, right? Okay, so let's leave this. Now let's play around with the release. Interesting, right? Let me really crush this. It's almost chopping off the sound when I've got the release set like this. Right, so I've turned the release up to about 15% of a second, right? And the higher I go up, everything is just constantly compressed. Okay, so that's a basic rundown of how a compressor works. What's a good way to compress this? Well, there's two ways to look at it. You like the way it sounds. You just want to bring some of the peaks under control. You know, there's a thing about recorded music. You ever notice when you're listening to, let's say, you go to a concert at the Frack Hall and you're hearing classical music, right? The dynamic range for classical music can be from incredibly quiet to unbelievably loud, right? And you're sitting in that chair focused in on the concert. So it can be really quiet and it can be unbelievably loud. But in a recording situation, there are other considerations to take into, there are other things to take into consideration. And when you're performing in a studio to record something, you typically tend to compress your own playing dynamics, right? A little bit. And that helps people mix things and blend things in a little bit later. That's like one of the great things that a studio drummer has, the ability to know just how loud is and just how soft is, and, you know, be able to have these, instead of having an incredibly wide dynamic range, their dynamic range might be this much, but within that smaller amount of soft to loud, they have many, 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 many gradations of volume. And the great studio drummers, somebody like Steve Gadd, somebody like Hal Blaine, all these people that are on hundreds and thousands of recordings, they learn from working in the studio all these subtle techniques about dynamics. And so one thing that you can do is you could take a listen to this and you could say, I just want to bring some of the peaks down a little bit, right? I don't want to change it dramatically. So we're going to lower our ratio to something like maybe just 3-to-1, right? So that means for every you go above the ratio and it brings down just a little bit, not a ton, right? I'm not going to use the exact numbers because I don't want to go too much into the math. And you play around with your attack. So you start off with very short.
Can you share your screen, please?
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. Please do interrupt me. Now you see I've got the attack here and it sounds like it's really compressed. The attack is very short. I don't want that. So I bring this up. And I play around with my, right? I might not even want it to be that much. So basically, I'm letting the attack of the drum through, and then whatever's left over after the attack is getting compressed a little bit, right? And then I'm raising my compression up. And you can see just the peaks are being brought down. You can't even hear it. It's very subtle. But here, when on my headphones, and I don't know how this is translating out over Zoom or later over YouTube, I can hear a definite change between bypassing it and play it. So let me just loop it, and I'll go back and forth between the two. It's in. Listen to the volume of the hi-hats. They're definitely louder when the compressor's in. And they're louder because the snare drum is softer. And then the last thing to do is to make sure that your makeup gain... Yeah, I'm looking here and I'm seeing that these green lines right here, like the peaks, that's pretty much similar. It's only the very loudest stuff that's being reduced there, so I'm not going to bother with makeup gain on this. Okay, so that's on this one. Now, do I want to do that? Question. Yeah, all right. So what we're going to do is there's a processing called parallel. Very funny, Claudia. There's parallel processing, which somebody remind me like in a week or two to bring that up. I'll probably remember it, but right now let's just focus on this. So let's take a look at this one. So this one is not as aggressive as the one that we just heard. Like if we just take a look at, zoom in and take a look at the audio files. Let me make these a little bit bigger. Right, you could see that this one has greater amplitude. The peaks on this one go way up, right? As opposed to this one, it's a more moderate volume. So let's bring in our, so what I'm going to do is just Option, click, and drag that here. All right. Now, what you can do at first is you can, I don't like to use presets, but they are useful. So right up here, the word preset, and it says factory default. You can click there and it's got a bunch of preset. Right? Let me zoom back a little bit. It's got a bunch of presets. It's a librarian. Right? So let's say it's got loops, snare annihilator. I'm going to call that up and I'm going to take a look at the settings, right? A ratio of 100:1, very fast attack, very low threshold, and I'm going to play the sound. And I'll bypass it. Now, when you hear the snare drum on this one seems to last longer. It goes pow, right? Listen to with it bypassed how long the snare drum sound is. It's very quick. Now with it in. So what's happening is that the attack is being de-emphasized of the snare, so you're hearing the ring out of the snare. So you're actually making the snare sound longer, right? So you're sound designing. You're changing the actual timbre of the drums by doing something like this. Let's take a look at another one. Let's do drum attack. What does that do? Okay, so there's too much makeup gain. It's coming out too loud, so let me bring that down. Right. So at first, this is not the kind of sound that I'd want you to get. I think that I'd prefer you to do, so what you can do is you can click on the librarian and go to the bottom and go back to factory default, and it will reset everything. So set your threshold. And you can watch the bouncing ball up here, and you can just see like that red ball. Whenever it goes to the right of the orange line, that means it's above the threshold. Right? So I'm just catching that snare drum and kick drum. And then bring the attack down a little bit. So you see I bring that fast attack down. Listen to the sound of the snare drum now. It almost sounds like the snare drum is fading in instead of hitting hard. So you can totally destroy and ruin your And I'm looking here and I'm just catching the loudest sound. Right? And bringing that down. All right. So I think we can move forward from that. That's about 50 minutes on compression. We will come back to this. All right. So if you want to use compression on your track, I'm going to show you how to use it with other instruments as I continue on mixing the next track. Subtle. You know, just so that you can just barely tell that it's on. Get used to doing that first before you learn how to dramatically shape the sound. And we'll work with the 1176 next week. We'll work on that. So this is just, I want to move forward and actually spend some time mixing. I went over EQ last week. We've gone over delay and reverb multiple times. We went over it in the last semester, and we've gone over it here. And as I keep mixing, we'll be going over it. So just so that you know, the game plan is that you're going to mix a couple of tracks, right? And then we're going to work on, I'm going to show you about recording, doing our best that we can do to record some live instruments. Some of you already know how to do that. You took Recording Studio Fundamentals with me. Some of you didn't take Recording Studio Fundamentals, so you don't know that. But it's good review for everybody. And we'll talk about that in about 3 weeks. And then we'll start working towards our final project. So we're going to have a couple of mixed projects that we're going to be doing for the rest of this month. And then, around the beginning of November, we'll be starting in on the final project, and there will be a draft due. So this class is much different than all my other classes in that there's only a few projects in this class, right? But the projects are big, and they're all specifically targeted to learning more about audio recording. You recorded some audio, you learned how to edit it and process it in the computer to create your sampler instruments. You learned how to program sampler instruments. Now we're moving into mixing more and being more detailed about mixing. And we'll be doing that really for on and off for the rest of the semester. I'll be showing you stuff about mixing and different strategies for capturing live instruments. And we'll do the best that we can given the parameters of this Zoom situation. Obviously, if we were in school, we'd be in the recording studio now, and we'd be working together that way. The problem with the recording studio is that the control room is very tiny. There's very little space. We have, with the number of students we've got in the class now, we'd have we'd be all on top of each other. So it's really not a good situation. And it does bother me, because it is the most fun part of my entire teaching schedule, is the last like 6 or 7 weeks of this class, when students I've had for 2 and maybe 3 semesters, you're working together and you're recording each other and you're working as teams, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. And that's the one thing that I do miss quite a bit about teaching in person. It's interesting. Like, for example, as those of you that are jazz majors know, there are many students that come from other countries, right? So like 2 or 3 years ago, I had a session, I had a class where I had a student from Austria, I had many students from Korea, I had a student from China, I had a student from Australia, or New Zealand actually, I had students from Central America, Colombia, and some students who are American, right? And many of the Asian students went to Berkeley, so they'd been in America for a while, so their English was not great, but not bad. But all the other students had issues that were foreign students, had issues with speaking English. And so, but when they were working together, it didn't really matter. They were able to communicate. One person would be running Pro Tools, the other person would be producing the session, another person would be in the studio moving microphones around, and then there'd be the talent that they'd be recording. And it's really a great thing that music can bring people together to do stuff from such disparate backgrounds. And even if you can't speak each other's language really well, or you're stuck with a secondary language that none of you know really fluently, it doesn't matter. The points were made and people work together, and it really is. It's, for me, it's like the best part of my entire teaching schedule. Anyway.
Pete, I have a question.
Yeah, Paul.
You have the compression, like I notice it's like individualized for like one drum set. Is it common to set up like an aux track and then route it? Or is it more, because it's more individualized than, let's say, reverb or delay. Is that true? So it's hard to draw a generalized notion.
So there is a tech I have, because I'm teaching you the basics of compression right now, first of all, right? Second of all, there is something called parallel processing, and I don't want to get into that right now, but that's where you set up an aux track and you have a compressor on it, and you just crush the sound completely, and then you blend some of that with the original sound, and it adds a lot of energy but still gives you the dynamics of the regular track. That would be getting confusing. People are going to have enough trouble getting this right now, so I want to stay focused just on this. Typically, though, if you had a drum kit with separate instruments, you would probably have compressor on the snare drum, a compressor on the kick drum, and then you have all those instruments routed to an aux track as its master track, which I'm going to show you today, and then you'd have a compressor on the master track to blend the whole drum kit together. So there's many ways to approach it, but the first thing is to understand the basic operation of a compressor. Okay, great. That's a good question. The track that we were working on last week, my little orchestral thing, just to go in a different direction, and then I'll do something with more drums in it. Let's see. So let's get this. So notice how I changed the size of all the tracks. Does everybody know about that? Right? So what I'm doing here is I'm holding down Control and Option. Yes, Jinhee, I'm going to do that right now with panning. So, yeah. Okay, so I'm holding down Control and Option. The downward facing arrow shrinks all the tracks, and the upward facing arrow enlarges all the tracks. And you can hold it and it will just scroll, right? Or you could just individually tap it. So let's get back to this track here. Let me take a listen to this. Let me make this a little bit bigger too. Talk about changing styles. All right, so Amy, Jinhee, as far as panning goes, right? If we look here, I've got my winds here, and I've set them. There's like several ways of going about it. If you've got an orchestral piece, well, how is an orchestra set up? An orchestra is set up with the violins, one on your left when you're looking at the orchestra, violins, two there, violas, cellos, and basses, right? So that's how your string orchestra is set up. And you can go online and you can like look up, like for example, right, an orchestra seating chart. And you can find all of these charts, all these images, right? And you could see different ways to set up an orchestra. This is traditional, right? If you need pictures, that's good too. So you can use that as a guide. All right, so this is the Allman Brothers Band, live, with funny pictures of Dwayne on there. This looks like it was at the Beacon, right? So look at how they are set up. They've got Greg Allman here on the left playing his keyboards. You've got a drummer here, a second drummer here, a percussionist back here. You've got Derek Trucks here. You've got Warren Haynes here, and you've got Oteil Burbage, the bass player, here. So two guitars right in the center, one a little left, a little right, bass over here. So this is weird because, you know, if for a live recording, this would be interesting. But with most recordings that use this kind of setup, you want the drums sort of in the middle, and not many people have two drum sets and a percussionist. And you want the bass and the kick drum in the middle. But this is a live setup, and so this is the way that looks live. So let's look something else. Let's see. Right, okay, so you can see here, this is the Bob James. Everybody knows who Bob James is, right? He's got the pianos on the left side of the stage, the bass is in the middle, and the drums are over in the right side of the stage, right? So this is how, when you see a lot of piano trios, this is how they're set up. The bass is sort of anchored in the middle. So there's all sorts of ways of panning things, but for my little group here, which is sort of a chamber group, I want to keep it so that the sound is nice and full with space for every instrument. So what I've done with my winds here is I've got this oboe. I'm going to exaggerate this. I'm going to pop it over so that it's a little bit more to the left. And I have the original sound on, so this should be in stereo. So that right now is coming like, if this is all the way to the left, it's coming in sort of like at this angle, right? So if this is center, it's like about here. So I've got the flute playing the melody. So the oboe is at 49 to the left. It's a little bit wider than I would put it, but I'm doing this for demonstration. So I'm going to take the flute, which is playing the melody, and pan it there also. So all my flutes are going to go over there because I've got a few different tracks of flute. I've got 2 oboe tracks. So now my oboes and my flutes are panned so that I'm hearing them like this, right? Let me see where the oboe and here. The oboe and flute are playing together here. So when I'm hearing that now, I'm hearing the flute mostly in this ear and the oboe mostly in that ear. So that's nice and balanced, right? And I'm keeping the piccolo, which is at the end, in the center. Okay? And then so I've got my winds, and now my horn. So for right now, I'm going to leave the horn in the center. That's fine. All right, so now I've got those set up nicely. I want to look at my keyboards, my pitched percussion. Now, I want to leave my piano, which is one of the main instruments in this track, I want to leave it centered, right? So, good. The piano is these 3 tracks. Right here I've got the piano right hand, and then I recorded my left hand because I want to have more control over my left hand in that part and make it a little bit, and not have it be blended together. And that's another trick. But over here we've got marimba. So I've got that marimba and I've got horn, right? And these are recorded stereo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the horn and I'm going to have the horn be a little bit to the left. So I've got that, I'm just moving the right side of the stereo field more towards the center, and then I'm going to do the opposite with the marimba for right now. Let me turn off the piano. And add our winds. Let's go to the flutes. Right, so I'm hearing a nice spread here with nothing in the middle. And what's good about that is that if I add the acoustic bass, I've left space in the middle for my acoustic bass to anchor the track, right? So I've got my higher pitched instruments, my woodwinds, the French horn's sort of a mid-range piece, but I've got all those things panned, and I'm leaving a little hole in the middle, not a huge hole, but a little hole where the bass can fit right in the middle there and have nothing else in the stereo field in its way, and it can anchor the track. So that's really nice. And let me add the piano back in. Come on, man. Now, the left hand on the piano was recorded, you know, if I had a stereo microphone set up on the piano, it's sort of putting the left hand on the left hand side of the speaker. So that's okay. I've got that separated out so I can adjust the volume there later. And then now the other thing to do is to listen to our upper strings, right? So I've got these panned so that similarly the violin is a little bit on the left, and that's cool because the violin 1, right, is a little bit on the left. That's the highest pitch violin. And the flute, which is the highest pitch wind, and the piccolo's in the center, but the flute is on the opposite side, right? So I'm not only balancing things this way, but I'm also taking into account pitch. So do I want things to blend together in which case I would have them both be on top of each other, or do I want to increase that spread? That's what I've chosen here. That's something that you need to think about, right? So what do I mean by that? So here when the flute comes in, right? So the lead violin is up here and the lead flute is over here. And obviously that's going to be opposite because this is my left, even though it looks like my right when you're looking at it, right? Now, if I change that flute and move it over to where the violin is, I don't hear the flute as well, so that means I'd probably have to turn the flute's volume up to hear it, and then that sort of messes with my gain structure. Right? Okay. So that's good. Now, let me just solo the upper strings, right? So I've done this a little bit different than a string quartet. I've made my upper strings be a little bit of a surround, because a string quartet would have violin 1, violin 2, viola, and cello, almost like a horseshoe shape, right? I've done violin 1 and violin 2 on this, and then I'll do the same with the violas and the cellos. And the reason I'm doing that is I want to leave that center free for the bass, right? I really want to keep that bass have its own spot in the world. So let me right, so this is the viola and the cello's on the opposite side. And that's nice because then when I play that with violin 2 and violin 1 that's also in that. So now you can hear everything because they're spread out nicely. The high violin is over here. So this guy was getting in the way of this with the volume, so I just brought the volume down a little bit. Right? So if you can't hear something that you want to hear, instead of turning it up all the time, learn how to turn down something else to make it present. All right, so I've got a good overall volume here. Now, I'm missing some stuff, right? Can anybody think of some things that I'm mixing? Things that I'm missing in this mix. Listen to the sound of it and tell me what's missing. The bass is in now, Salita. It wasn't in before, but I just have it on now, so just take a listen. It sounds like it was recorded in my apartment in New York City on the Upper West Side, which is where it was recorded. So we need to add some time-based effects. And yes, reverb, correct, Paul. So let's add in, and what I want to do is I also want to have one master output for each of the food groups. Right? And I'll show you why in a minute. So what kind of food groups do we've got? We've got, if we look here in our groups, we've got winds, pitched percussion, upper strings, and lower strings. I'm going to break the pitched percussion up because I want to have a separate output for the piano, because that's a soloist, almost a solo instrument. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do Command Shift N like Nancy, and I will do 5 stereo aux inputs. All right. I only did 1. Darn. Well, I made a mistake. So if I right click on this, I can scroll down and do duplicate, and I can just duplicate that 4 times, and then that'll give me 5 tracks. All right. So holding the Shift key down, I select the top one. They're all selected, and I'm going to color code these so that they're all the same color. There we go. And then I'm going to solo safe all of them. So I'm holding the Command key down and clicking on the S so that the S becomes grayed out. And I have to do one other thing. I need to go to my I/O and reset it because I was working on something else before this. And let's do default. Okay. And I want to set up these so that they have sequential inputs. So I'm going to hold down, I think it's Command, Option, and Shift. And I'm going to click on the input here. And I'm going to go to bus, and I'm going to select the first open bus, 1 and 2. And if I zoom in here, you'll see that it automatically routed it to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, etc. Whoops, let's zoom out. So that little trick was Command, Option, Shift, and then set your input, and then it will do it sequentially. If I do Option and Shift, it will set them all to the same input. So those are 2 good key commands or shortcuts. Command, Option, Shift to sequentially set the input or the output of all selected tracks sequentially, right? And then Option and Shift to set them all to the same input or output. So I want to sequentially set them up. And then, some of this stuff is technically boring, but I'm going to have to rename these. So this is going to be Wins. And I'm going to call this Wins Master, MSTR. So I'm creating a master sub. And then this one is going to be Pitched Perc. And then the next one is going to be Piano. And the next one will be High Strings. So, mixing is a combination of doing these rote things and being creative. And this is Lower Strings. And then I have to name these tracks. So this is Wins. And then you can click Next here, right? And let's see. Pitched Perc. And next would be Piano. And next would be Upper Strings. Actually, I've misnamed these. I'll fix it. Upper Strings, MSTR. And then Lower Strings, Stribbings. No, strings, not stribbings. Let's go back. Oops. Let's open up Wins and just fix that. Wins, MSTR. Pitched Perc, MSTR. Piano. And I'm doing this because there's 3 piano tracks. And this is really, really helpful. So what we want to do now is select the outputs of all of the Wins. So I'm clicking on the top one, holding the Shift key down, and then I'm going to go to the bottom wind track. So I've got these color coded so that I know where they are. And I'm going to click. And I want to set the outputs of all of these to go to those sub-master tracks that I just created. Okay? So to set the outputs to the same source, to the same place, you want to hold down Option and Shift. All right? To set them sequentially, it's Command, Option, and Shift. But to set them all to the same, all selected tracks, Option and Shift. So if I do that, and I go to the output of my piccolo and set that to, route that to Win's master, all of these are now routed to Win's master. So you see how quick that was? And then I'm going to send the horn to that also. I've just made an executive decision. And then harp, marimba, and celeste, that's going to go to pitched percussion. So Option and Shift, go to the output, pitched percussion. I've got 4 tracks of piano. 3 tracks of piano, sorry. Output, holding down Option and Shift, go to the output, piano master, high strings, right? Selecting the top one, holding the Shift key down, selecting the bottom one, holding Option and Shift, go to the output, route it to high strings, viola, through acoustic bass, Option Shift, and I might take the acoustic bass out of that. Let me just see. And then now that that's done, I'm here and I'm going to do Command Shift N, and I'm going to put 3 stereo AUX inputs. I'm going to make that 4. And 1 master fader. And that's going to be stereo. We haven't talked much about master faders, all right? So these are going to be my time-based effects tracks. So I'll color code these all the same. This is going to be my master music track, so I'm going to have no color for that. And this is going to be my master fader, so I will have no color for that also. So I will solo save all of these. And then the top one will be reverb. I'll call this hall for right now. And then this will be reverb room. And in case I want to try delay, I have delay. And then we need to set our inputs up. So I want to sequentially do it. So it's Command Option Shift. Go to our input. Pick the first free one. It's white, right? It's not colored amber like these. They're in use. That's why they're amber. Click on that. And let's rename these. Hall. Room. Delay. And then I'm going to call this music, the music track. And I'm going to tell you why I have a separate AUX for my music track in a minute. And for right now, what I'm going to put in the master track is I'm going to put an EQ7, EQ3 7-band EQ. And we're not going to use this on the master track right now. What we're going to use this for, this is a hack, right? If you look at my desk here, I've got this unit right here. That's a metering a piece of hardware that does metering, so that if I put this plug in here, I can play the track. Let me move this so that you could see it a little better, right? You can see it gets all colored. It gives me a frequency spectrum, and it gives me the volume like a master meter, and it's very easy to see. It's big. So I have that on my desk. It's very helpful. Well, you can sort of do a hack of that, at least for the level, because if you notice right here, EQ 3 7-band has a meter. So what I want all of you to do is the loudest part of anything that you're mixing for me should peak at -6 on this meter. If something goes over that occasionally, that's okay. Just be careful that things aren't too soft, right? Like, for example, I'm just going to bring all these down. That's too soft, right? You don't want that. You want to get it so that as you're working, your peaks are around -6. If they go a little above -6, that's not a problem. But if they get to be up around -3 consistently all the time, then that becomes a problem. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a couple more groups. So I've got these guys here, right? And I'm going to do Command G, and these are going to be my submasters. And these three are going to be my effects. And then we're going to plug in our deverb, pull that gain up, Option Shift, drag that in there down to this one. And in here, we're going to put in the mod delay 3. Great. All right. So we're ready, right, to continue mixing this. One more thing to do, actually. I want to take the output of all my masters and all my time-based effects. So I've selected my Winds master. I'm holding the shift key down. Let me move the camera so you can see that a little easier. Whee, having fun with cameras and arms. Okay, so I'm holding down the shift key. I selected Winds master. Go to delay, and notice they're all white. Now I want to route the outputs of all these to the music track. Option Shift, take the output of the top one and route it to our music track. And the outputs of all of these are now going to the music track, so that everything is going through that music track, and I can mute that. Now, why do I do that? This is a habit that I've gotten into from my work as a film composer and television composer, because typically I'll have my entire session set up, right? But I also have a film and dialogue. And then if let's say I want to bring the volume of the music down, I have to go to everything and bring it down individually. If I've got everything music related to music routed through one output, it's just a matter of turning the volume on that one thing down, so that if I'm doing a mix for my film clients, I can have the music be at a level that I think it should be very easily, and I can do like a quick mix, just changing the volume by just changing the volume of the music track, by automating it, like by drawing in stuff like this, right? So I like to have everything coming out of the one music track. It really it makes things a little bit easier for me as a film and television composer, and I think it works well for mixing any kind of music. Okay, so now, one great thing about doing a submaster is that we don't need to have different reverbs sent into every instrument, right? So I'm going to solo my winds. Let me go to here, and I'm going to make it a small hall. All right, and then let's go to our winds master, and we'll send a bus to the hall. So everything it's funny, you can hear the pads on the flute hitting the open holes. right? So now with just that one little move, all my winds all sound like they're in the same space. But if I want to do a little bit more work, like say for that end flute right here, that's a piccolo, right? If I want to make that sound further away, well, that's pretty easy to do too. So I could take this and maybe I can make this a larger, what I'll do is I'll make this a larger hall, and then I'll have to rename the, so I'll name this hall 2 or large hall, right? Just to give that piccolo a little bit, make it sound like it's further away so it's not right in your eardrum, right? So let's try the medium size. And so that's large hall. Well, I can always still send this to the large hall. Right, so that makes the piccolo sound a little less in your face and gives it a little bit more distance. So it's actually going through 2 different reverbs, right? It's going a little bit of the smaller hall and a little bit more of the larger hall. So it still retains the quality of being in the ensemble, but just seated a little bit further away from you, which is what you want to do with a piccolo because it's a painful instrument to sit next to. Yeah, the piccolo is so loud. You guys all know that a piccolo can play above 80 musicians in an orchestra. One piccolo can be heard, right? That's how loud it is. All right, so now we've got our pitched percussion. So we'll solo this, but let's mute the pianos for right now. So where is our pitched percussion?
Can you share your screen?
Yes, thank you. Here we go. So that sounds like it's recorded in a space already, right? Let's add that piano left hand. So I want to blend that in a little bit. So I'm going to go to the same hall that we used on the regular, on the regular winds. And I'm going to add some of that to the piano. And this is a good way to hear what it's sounding like, to play a little excerpt and stop it. Yep, so that left hand on the piano is a bit too intense. So I'm going to bring that down here. Great. And then we've got our upper strings. Yeah, it's so funny because I can hear the sound of my bedroom that I recorded those strings in. Even with all the sound treatment in there, it had sort of like a really small room feel. So. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring down the volume of this guy here. I'm going to do this with clip-based gain. So what I do there is Command, I'm going to put the playback head right before that, Command E, and that separates that out, and I can bring the volume of that down. right? So I want, this is my focal point right here, this guy here, and I want that to be heard. So what I'm going to do here for this guy is I'm going to add some of the larger hall in with my fiddler. So this is one guy playing the violins and the violas. His name is Ralph Farris. He's a really good friend of mine. He plays in a string quartet called Ethel, and he was in The Lion King for probably like 15 years, and he stopped being in it 7 or 8 years ago. He left. And then the cello is another friend of mine, Peter Prosser, who I met when I was in Miss Saigon. He played at he subbed in the cello chair. He's also a conductor, and he teaches at Manus. And he's married to a former classmate of mine, Lisa Arcus, who's a flute player who graduated when I did from Queens College back in pre-Christ era. Just kidding. 1982. Before your parents all knew each other. Seriously. Okay. That was a joke. That was a joke. Let's listen to our lower strings. Okay, so this brings me a little bit of an issue here that I want to think about for a second, right? I want to keep my low end clean. So I've got the acoustic bass going in with all my lower strings. And if I add reverb to all the lower strings, what sounds good with the viola and the cello might not sound good with the bass. So in this instance, I'm going to add individual sends to the lower strings. This way I can control the amount of reverb in the low end of my track a lot better. You understand what I'm talking about? Low end and reverb can create a lot of mud. So rather than treating it as a section, I'm going to break it down into subsections. So the violas and the cellos and the acoustic bass. And I just do it individually. So I've got this soloed, so I'm going to go to my viola 1, and I'm going to bust it to my hall, and I'm going to add some in. It's right here. That's a decent amount. And then what I'll do is I'll just option click and drag that onto the cello and the 2 cello tracks, so that if we go here and I'll mute the bass, they sound like they've got room. Maybe it could be a little bit bigger, but it's not muddy. And then with the acoustic bass, excuse me, I'm going to leave that dry for right now. Now, once you've added these time-based effects, you're adding more volume, right? You're sending audio into these tracks and it's spitting out additional audio. So you want to check your... We're still good. So can you guys hear, listen to the marimba sound. Let me solo that for you. Get that sound in your ears. I'm going to play it. I'm going to unsolo it. Listen to how it sounds with the ensemble and let me know if it's too soft, too loud, or just right. Too soft, too loud, or just right. So I'm going to solo the marimba. You'll get the sound of the marimba in your ears. I'll undo the solo button. Everybody else will come in and let me know about the level. Anyone venture a guess? What I'm teaching you now is not easy to hear. Right? There's, when you go to music school, you take sight singing and dictation. That's the extent of your ear training. And those are invaluable skills as a musician. This is another kind of ear training, right? Being able to listen into a mass of sound and pick individual instruments out, pick groups of instruments out, and hear how the volumes of each instrument relate to each other. So when I know this track really well, so the piano right hand and the marimba, the marimba's too loud. So there's two ways of dealing with that. I could separate that out and bring the volume down here, but there's also, I'm hearing another. Right? I'm listening with the bass now, right? So I want to lose some of the low end on the marimba. I don't need it, right? I only need the little percussive thing. If it was a solo marimba, beautiful. I'd leave it in there, but realize that this sound has to fit in with the rest of the ensemble. So I'm going to take a little bit of that low end because I don't need that, right? So EQ, I'm going to just use for right now our one band EQ, and I'm going to do a high pass filter. And I'm just going to subtly, so I'll make it 6 dB per octave. So what's getting rid of is like a nasal, there's a nasally kind of a sound. And that's gotten rid of. It's really hard to hear, especially over Zoom or the internet. But what I'm hearing there is part of that marimba sound is this no 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 no. It's an ugly nasally sound. And I could surgically find where that frequency is and bring it down. But I'm teaching you that this is also using a high pass filter to get rid of that, and then it doesn't get in the way of the bass, and it fits in better with the piano right hand. And it also gets out of the way of the left hand of the piano. Now, the next thing I'm going to do to the marimba is I'm going to compress it a little bit. And we're going to do just some of that subtle compression that we were talking about before. So let me solo this. And we'll add our Dyne 3 compressor limiter. Right? So see how soft it is here? So our threshold, ratio 3:1. So it's interesting because it's also attenuating some of the higher frequencies, right? Because when he's playing louder, the marimba gets brighter. But if the louder sounds are being brought down in volume, you're not hearing that treble sound, the treble as much, the higher frequencies. So remember when I said that compression is also a tone shaping effect, right? This is a perfect example of how I use it in an orchestra setting, right? It's just very subtle. I'm bringing down 1 to 3 on just those loudest notes. And now all of a sudden you've got a piano rimba instead of a piano and a marimba. You've got a piano rimba, right? It's like an oboe and a flute together as a flobo. That's my teacher, Professor Musgrave, who my composition teacher was a graduate student. That's how she would talk about combinations of instruments. Now, there's something else in the track. There's this little thing here. The flute player is Kathleen Nester. I've known her since 1991. She's assistant principal flutist for the New Jersey Symphony and the piccolo player. She's a tremendous, tremendous musician. So what is that? That's an effect, right? So this gives me an opportunity to play around and do some sound designy thing, maybe with delay and maybe more reverb on this, and maybe do some volume automation so that that thing fades in. She's doing a little fade in, but maybe I want to exaggerate that, right? So let's work on that for a bit. Let me solo that. And maybe I'm going to add a little bit more reverb. So I'm going to go to my large hall, right? And what you can do is you can automate the send level. Let me show you how to do that. Let me zoom in. So right here where it says waveform, that tells you what you're seeing on the track, right? If I click here, you could see volume, and we'll be working on that in a second. You can see mute and pan, right? You could see that when I've panned, it's a little bit to the right, and you see it's right 49. You could see this line, black line here. If we go down, it says send large hall, and you can automate things. So if I add level, right now I'm at 0, well, look, at minus infinity, right? So what I can do is, let's get this guy centered. Great. Is I can take my pencil tool, let me get back out, get my pencil tool, and we'll use the straight line right now. If you get good at this, you can use whatever you want, but I would just counsel you until you get good at drawing things in to use the pencil tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with no reverb, and then as this line plays, I'm going to add more and more reverb. So it sounds like it's getting further and further away. So let's listen to that. Right? And you saw that the fader went up like that. Now it's exaggerated. It's too much. It's too much. Right? But I just wanted you to see. It can come in a little earlier. So see how I'm playing around, I'm listening. And then I can click and draw some more dots, and this one can be a longer one. So she got this long note there, so I can bring it up on that long note. Okay, so that's kind of cool. Now, what happens if we add some delay, right? Let's go take a look at our delay and set that up. So one delay trick that I use often is to with this particular delay is that I can have two different rhythmic values on my left side and on my right side. And I've gone over this a little bit before. And what that does is that gives you a sense of stereo spread. So if you think about the sound, right? The sound is going to come in where I think I have this one panned in the middle. Do I have this one panned in the middle? Let me take a look. No, let's put this in the middle. All right. So I pan that in the middle. So the flute's going to come in the middle, this particular flute, right? And then in one ear is going to, like a certain amount of time later, it's going to come in, and a certain amount of time beyond that, the right side is going to come in. So you're going to get this sort of tri-tonal entrance of the sound, which really creates a big spread. So one combination I like is a dotted quarter on one side and a quarter on the other side, or maybe even a dotted quarter on the other side. And we'll add a little bit of feedback, not too much. And I'm just going to turn up the level and take a listen and see if I like this. It's weird because it doesn't sound a stereo like it should. All right, something's going on wrong here. What have I done? Interesting. Okay, so something is not giving me what I want, right? I want there to be separation between, in the stereo field, between the delay and the original sound. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the original pan. So now the flute's a little bit in the right. I still don't understand why why the delay is coming out of the center. Let me take a look. Interesting. That's a stereo. That's stereo. Oh, I see what the problem is. Okay. So you see how, like, no matter how long you do this, you can make a mistake, right? So look what I've done here. Can anybody see what I've made? I've made a mistake. I've made both delay times the same, right? They're both dotted quarter notes. So let me make this a dotted eighth note, and then we should get our panning. There we go. Beautiful. Okay. I'm going to fail myself. Just kidding. All right, so let's put this back in the center. Nice. And next thing to do is we're going to help her fade in. So I'm going to go here and select volume. Let me zoom in so you can see this a little better. Volume. And I'm just going to draw in. I'm going to go from the peak backwards. All right. I'm going to take a listen to that. Great. And then I'm going to do the same thing here. Peak and backwards. Cool. All right, let's listen to that in the mix. Okay, so it starts off too soft and it gets too loud. So let's change this. Now let's listen to it. And we'll do the same thing here. Start it off softer and it won't get as loud. Okay, that could get a little bit louder. That's not loud enough. Now, if I really wanted to get, I don't really know if this works with this track, but I could also go here and go to pan. And I could actually make this move in this, the dry signal move, right? So I could just go like that. Let me take a listen. I don't mind that. And I could do the opposite here. And then maybe what I'll do is I can fade out her long note a little bit. because it's going on a little too long. I just noticed something. I've got the instrument column here. I don't need to have that, so I can get rid of that, and it gives me a little bit more room on the screen. So this is sounding pretty good. Like if you guys could hand in a mix that sounded like this would be like an A+, right? I could spend a few more hours fine-tuning this and making this sound better, but overall, it accomplishes the goals of this first mix: panning, balancing of levels, grouping, color coordinating, different outputs, reverb and delay, master output for the music, labeling. I mean, there's a lot of stuff here that I want you to learn, right? All these busybody things that I'm asking you to do: color coordinating, adding VCA masters, adding sub-augs, adding reverbs, having that one music track, all that busy stuff, right? Eventually, that if you work on it, that becomes part of your workflow, and you can get very quick at doing it. Like if I didn't have to explain it, I could have had all that stuff done in just a few minutes, right? But I have to show it to you and explain it to you, so it seems a little bit slow. But once you've got that done, you see how it made the back end of what I was doing so much quicker, right? I just had to add one reverb for all the winds, and then, you know, maybe I wanted a little extra reverb on the flute, that one flute and that one piccolo, just went back in and did it, right? And it gives me a lot of flexibility. And so this is really good, a good level of mixing. Now, was there anything that you want me to go over again as far as what I've done so far today in the time we have remaining? No? All right, let me continue working on this a little bit more. So I'm listening from the beginning. So I'm hearing a problem right now, all right? I'm just going to continue on with doing this stuff. Let's listen to the piano. Let's see. Let me make this a little bigger.
Could you share your screen, please?
Thank you. Okay, so it's this track here. And let's listen to the bass right here. Okay, so it's a mellow piano sound. I was using the soft pedal, but I think that my left hand is getting in the way of the bass. And let me just see where, this is another reason why I've got this on different channels. Let me hear what it sounds like here where it's a little bit louder. Yeah, so the left hand's getting in the way of the piano, of the bass. So let me try first with the EQ3. So the way I hear it, right, is right now there's, again, just like with the marimba, there's a kind of a nasally quality to the sound. And just getting rid of some of that. It's thin, right? If this was solo piano, I don't think so. That doesn't work. And maybe I'll bring the frequency down. But when you add the bass guitar, the bass, all of a sudden it's not fighting the bass anymore. All right? So just a very subtle thing. Okay, so now in this area here, the piano's too loud. I can't hear the cello. So I'm going to highlight this. I'll do Command E to separate that out, and I'll use clip-based gain right here and just bring this down a little bit. So I'm going to solo the flute, and I'm going to solo the this violin right here. Okay, so I'm going to add some compression onto the flute just to keep her dynamics a little bit reined in just a little bit. So just a very... They didn't play these together at the same time. You know, I overdubbed one instrument at a time. So it's a little bit hard for them to play ensemble that way, but that sounds more blended to my ears. And now let me add the cello. I think violin is too loud, right? So I'm getting fine tuning, right? So I've got that separated out. So Command E, and let me just bring the volume on that down a little bit. Just a couple dB. Flute's still a little loud, so I'll do clip-based gain here. Just bring that down just a tiny bit. Ah, we've got some oboe there, which we're not hearing, right? Okay, so with this, it's a little mellow, the sound, so I'm going to add a little bit. Right, so I'm searching in this area here for something that sounds smooth and add some high end but isn't spiky. So that's the sound with no EQ. EQ's in. And I don't need to have any low end in this particular track. So if there's anything in the room, right? In other words, if she was recorded in my room, and if there's some low end rumble, something like that. Fits in nice with the piano. This is too soft, so I'm going to separate this out and bring the volume here up. And let's see how that fits in. Right, so now I'm deciding, now that I see that there's an oboe there, I've decided to make a flobo, right? So I'm going to make the flute and the oboe be one sound, even though they're in octaves. There we go. Gonna check my meter. Too loud. All right, so that's a good place to stop. There's one other thing I want to do, and Claudia had an issue with making an MP3 bouncing her track, so I want to go over that again. All right, so I'm going to select everything here. Doesn't matter what track, I'm just selecting. See, I caught myself. All right, so I've selected the entire track. Whoops. And I'm going to do Command Option and the letter B. And my file type is going to be MP3. And I'll make today's date. Bounce, and then another dialog is going to come up. And this will be Artist Me. Okay, and then album, whatever, audio MIDI 2. You want to make it 320 kilobytes per second, the constant bit rate, and the encoding speed, highest quality, slower encoding time. It's not going to take that much longer. Hit OK. And I made a mistake, so hit Escape. I want to do it offline. Hit OK, and boom. See, it's not taking that long. I've got a really powerful computer, but audio files don't take as long to render as instrument tracks. And then let's go here and Faith Stem Mix, and we've got our bounced files, and let's take a listen. Sounds good. So that's just a review in case there's something that you did that didn't quite work out when it was made to an MP3. The MPT sounded fine in the session. Right. So what I would say, Claudia, is to do that thing with the music track that I added here, and have all your tracks routed to that music track, and pop in that EQ7, and make sure that your level's not too hot. Because Pro Tools might play it back and it might sound fine, but it might be distorted. Although I don't remember that when I listened back to your track. It did. I would have mentioned that if the volume was too hot. I'll download your track and try it. All right, at some point over the next couple days and see if I get an issue with it. All right, I wanted to get into mixing something with the rhythm section, but I will do that next week. We went over a lot of stuff today. I thought the class went well. I had some technical issues. I have to tell you, man, my schedule this semester, they changed my film scoring class to 7:40 at night. That's too late. I'm an old man. I get up at 4 in the morning because I do a lot of stuff before the world starts happening. It's my peaceful time. And by the time, even if I nap during the day, by the time it gets to be 7:40, I'm like, I'm ready to start zoning out. I'm in bed I'm asleep by 9:30, 10 o'clock, but my mind is turned off. It's just kind of funny because I spent over 30 years of my life, 8:05, like I have to be at full energy. And I've always been an early riser, so it's always been an issue for me. But I was used to it back then. I was also younger. So, yeah. Anyway, I have much more energy at 4:40 than I do at 7:40. So, anyway, unless there's any questions, we can conclude today. Good class. I will pop this up. There won't be too much editing, so I'll probably have this up in a day or two. And if you want me to look at anything, upload, but email me and let me know that you want me to look at something before next week. And we'll see where we are with next week. So try to get everything done for next week, and we'll see where we are. All right? Everybody have a great day, and I will catch you next Thursday. Oh, right, next Thursday. Most likely we'll have a class. I'm having surgery on Wednesday. I'm fairly certain that I'll be okay on Thursday. If you don't hear from me, assume class will be happening. I will only contact you if class is not happening because I don't feel well. But I think that by Thursday, I'll be able to sit in this room and teach my class. I don't think that'll be too much of an issue because it's just arthroscopic surgery. And yeah, I should be okay to just sit in the room. All right. Okay, Salita.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Professor. Thank you.
I saw that, Salita. Thank you. I'll look at it tomorrow or Saturday. All right, or by the weekend for sure. All right, everyone. I will catch you all next week. Have a great weekend. Stay safe out there and enjoy the weather. It's a beautiful day this afternoon. It was.